Saltwater-soaked doubloons glint in the dim lantern light. The air smells of gunpowder and rum. Dozens of eyes, filled with greed and exhaustion, follow the quartermaster's every move. Elected by the crew to ensure fairness, he scoops up the coins. His hand pauses for a moment over his own sack. One wrong sound, one coin falling where it shouldn't, and this deck will turn into a bloodbath. This isn't just dividing the plunder, it's a lit fuse on a powder keg. We'll reveal the ingenious system these cutthroats devised to keep from slitting each other's throats, and the loopholes that allowed them to steal it all. We're talking about the famous Spanish pieces of 8, the primary currency of the Caribbean. The tension on deck is like the silence before a duel, where every man weighs whether the potential profit is worth the risk of being run through with a boarding cutlass. This motley crew of runaway sailors, murderers, and deserters was the most anarchic group of people on the planet. Yet, they created a code that was surprisingly democratic. They voted for their captain, decided together where to sail, and had a compensation system that would be the envy of any modern union. Herein lies the central paradox. To plunder effectively, they had to become paragons of justice, at least on paper. It was as if inmates who had taken over a prison first wrote a constitution that was fairer than the warden's laws. The code of Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts was so detailed it included rules of conduct and even a lights-out time of 8 p.m. In the next few minutes, you will learn why the quartermaster was more important than the captain when it came to gold. We will break down the 3 most sophisticated methods of cheating that didn't require brute force, and we will see the horrifying fate that awaited those whose cunning was ultimately exposed. To understand how they cheated, you first need to understand the rules they played by. Historian Marcus Rediker calls a pirate ship a multinational, multiracial, floating democracy. And the quartermaster, this hybrid of a COO and a union boss, was its chief guarantor. Forget the Royal Navy, where the pay gap was a chasm. On a pirate ship, one ironclad principle ruled: one man, one share. The captain or the ship's carpenter, as specialists, might count on 1.5 or at most 2 shares. But an ordinary pirate received his full, single share. This wasn't charity. It was a cold calculation that turned a rabble into a motivated crew where every man knew what he was risking his life for. On a merchant vessel, the captain earned 50 times more than a common sailor. Among pirates, this ratio rarely exceeded 2 to 1. Essentially, it was a joint stock company where every man was a shareholder, not just a hired hand. But their most striking innovation was the system of compensation for injuries. It was a cold, business-like price list that the entire crew agreed upon before each voyage. Lose a right arm, you get 600 pieces of 8, a left arm, 500, an eye or a finger, 100. Crucially, this money was paid from the total loot before the main shares were divided. This was the world's first corporate insurance policy for workers in a hazardous profession. To give you a sense of scale, 600 pieces of 8 was a fortune, the equivalent of several years' wages for an honest sailor. Put yourself in their place. You're in battle, and your leg is torn off by a cannonball. The crew offers you 400 pieces of 8. Is that a fair price for losing the ability to ever walk again? This almost cynical pragmatism was the only way to maintain morale. In a world without pensions or social safety nets, this money was a cripple's only chance to avoid starving to death ashore. It was a brutal but honest deal. You give your body to the ship, and the ship guarantees your survival. Most pirate codes strictly forbade gambling for money and the presence of women on board. This wasn't about morality. It was pure safety engineering. Money and women were the 2 main triggers for conflict in a confined, all-male environment. By removing these triggers, pirates minimized the risk of internal strife, which was more dangerous than any naval warship. The code didn't forbid violence, it regulated it. The Articles of John Phillips stated that if 2 men quarreled, their dispute would be settled ashore with pistol and cutlass. This was a way to isolate the conflict so it wouldn't consume the ship from within. The system seemed perfect: equality, insurance, discipline. But it had an Achilles heel: All power over the gold, from counting to distribution, was concentrated in the hands of just two men. And when the captain and the quartermaster looked at a mountain of treasure, their loyalty to the code faced its greatest test. It was a system of checks and balances, much like in a modern government. But when the executive and judicial branches collude, the entire system collapses. This was the fundamental vulnerability of pirate democracy. Forget the image of the captain from novels, an absolute monarch with a parrot on his shoulder. The pirate captain was more like the CEO of a high-risk startup. He was elected. His orders were law only in battle or during a chase. At all other times, he had one vote, just like the cabin boy swabbing the deck. His authority depended on success. One failed voyage, and the board of directors, the crew, could remove him with a simple vote. There are documented cases of captains being marooned for incompetence. In times of peace, the real power belonged to another man, the quartermaster. He was also elected but served as the crew's representative, a check on the captain's power. He was responsible for provisions, settled disputes, maintained discipline, and most importantly, managed all the plunder until it was divided. He was the judge, prosecutor, and treasurer, all in one. It was the quartermaster who first boarded a captured vessel to secure valuables and prevent looting. He was a living shield against the abuse of power. Now, let's look at the division of loot through their eyes. The captain leads men into battle, risks being the first to be hanged, and receives only 2 shares. Then there's the quartermaster. He holds all the gold, but a single miscalculation could be seen as treason and cost him his life. Their relationship was a classic prisoner's dilemma played out on a powder keg. If they colluded, they both stood to gain immensely. If one betrayed the other, the betrayer could win it all, while the betrayed would lose his head. And if they both remained honest, they received their standard, much smaller shares. The system was designed for them to police each other. It was a form of nuclear deterrence, 2 centers of power, each capable of destroying the other. The system worked as long as this balance of fear held, but as soon as one side decided that collusion was more profitable than confrontation, the Cold War on the ship ended, and a secret alliance against the rest of the crew began. Here is how this alliance worked in practice. The first and crudest method was pirate double bookkeeping. After a battle, the crew is exhausted, drunk on victory and rum. The captain and quartermaster are the first to go down into the captured ship's hold. They find 10,000 pieces of 8, but they announce 8,000 to the crew. The remaining 2,000 coins become their personal bonus, hidden away and divided later in port. No one is going to recount every sack in the heat of the moment. This was even easier to pull off with goods. The quartermaster would declare to the crew, "We sold this bale of silk for 500 pieces of 8, when in reality, he sold it for 800. The difference lined their pockets. It was their personal pension fund, stolen from their comrades. But the most brazen deception happened in plain sight during an internal auction. Gold and silver are easy to divide, but what about a diamond necklace or a rare navigational instrument? Such items were auctioned off to the crew. Here, the quartermaster became an actor. He could play along with his accomplice, the captain, by ignoring other bids or bringing the gavel down too quickly. A priceless item would be sold for a pittance to their inside man. Later ashore, they would sell it for its true value and split the profit. It was a performance where the entire crew were spectators, unaware that the winner of the auction had been chosen in advance, the height of fraud, performed to the applause of the deceived. Finally, there was the most elegant method, a scheme that was nearly impossible to prove. Before dividing the plunder, the quartermaster would read out a list of expenses: replenishing gunpowder, 200 pieces of 8, patching the sails, 150, bribing a port official, another 100. These sums were shamelessly inflated. None of the crew would go to the governor to verify how much his loyalty actually cost. The difference between the real price and the padded invoice became the quartermaster's net profit. This was the world's first system of kickbacks, operating with flawless efficiency in the shadow of the pirate code. These schemes worked because they were built on the leader's authority and the crew's blind trust. But there was always one man who was too sober, too observant, who noticed that the numbers didn't add up. And when he uttered a single word in the dead silence of the deck, "Thief," everything changed. That accusation was a detonator. There was no going back for anyone. The ship instantly became a courtroom, and the deck a scaffold. A pirate trial had no lawyers. Any crew member could make an accusation. The accused defended himself. Everyone present served as a witness, and the entire crew acted as the jury. The verdict was decided by a simple majority vote. It was justice in real time, a trial by mob at sea with no appeals. The burden of proof lay with the accused, and the judges were also the victims of the crime. The chances of acquittal were virtually zero. If you were found guilty of stealing from your own, the code offered several punishments, each worse than death. The most famous punishment was marooning. The guilty party was left on a deserted island with a small supply of water, a pistol, and a single bullet. This wasn't an act of mercy. The bullet offered a choice, a quick death by one's own hand or a slow one from starvation and thirst. It was psychological torture, a symbol of complete banishment from the brotherhood. The word marooning itself comes from the Spanish cimarrón, used to describe runaway slaves hiding in the wilderness. The punishment was symbolic. A pirate who betrayed his free brotherhood was returned to the state of a savage loner, exiled from their unique civilization. But if the crew was feeling particularly cruel, the thief would be keel-hauled. He was tied to a rope that ran under the ship's hull and dragged from one side to the other. The hull, covered in sharp barnacles and shells, acted like a cheese grater, tearing the skin and flesh from his body down to the bone. Few survived the ordeal, and those who did often drowned. This punishment was so effective that it was even adopted by some official navies, such as the Dutch. It was the most graphic lesson imaginable. Go against the ship, and the ship will destroy you. This brutality was meant to deter cheating. The punishment was so unimaginably horrible that it was intended to outweigh any temptation, no matter how large the prize. It was a system built not on trust, but on a balance of greed and fear. And it worked, as long as fear was the stronger force. But one man understood that fear wasn't just a deterrent, it was the ultimate asset. Edward Teach, or Blackbeard, was a genius of psychology and personal branding. He wove slow-burning fuses into his beard and lit them before battle, appearing before his enemies in a cloud of smoke like a demon from hell. His reputation was his primary weapon. He didn't trade in goods. He traded in terror. 6 pistols strapped to his chest, the burning fuses. It was a carefully crafted image designed for maximum effect. He won battles before they even began. Blackbeard didn't bother with petty schemes. He created an atmosphere of such total control on his ship that no one dared question his word. On one occasion, he locked himself and several crew members in the hold and set a pot of sulfur on fire just to see who could endure the longest. This wasn't sadism. It was a brutal performance. He was telling his crew, "I am willing to go further than any of you. I am willing to breathe the fumes of hell. Are you sure you want to cross me?" It was an inoculation of fear that was more effective than any code. The pinnacle of his genius came when he intentionally ran his flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, aground. He got rid of most of his crew, transferred to a smaller sloop with only 40 chosen pirates, and sailed away with all the loot. He didn't break the rule about dividing the plunder. He simply changed the roster of shareholders entitled to a share. It was the pirate equivalent of declaring corporate bankruptcy to escape obligations. By running the ship aground, he formally dissolved the enterprise, freeing him from his duty to pay hundreds of men. It was a scam disguised as an accident. Here, 2 approaches collide: the quiet collusion of a quartermaster who risks being exposed, and the loud tyranny of a Blackbeard, which leaves no room for dissent. A surgeon's scalpel versus a sledgehammer. What is more reliable? A complex lock that can be picked, or a huge, angry dog guarding the treasure that lets no one near? Blackbeard's example proves that any code, no matter how just, is powerless against human nature. The pirate code was a dam built with the best intentions to hold back an ocean of human greed. But the ocean always wins. It was a social experiment conducted under the harshest conditions, and it was doomed to fail. But this brutal experiment left us with 3 ironclad lessons. First, transparency kills theft. The public division of plunder was their defense against fraud. Today, progressive companies call this open book management. The more eyes on the money, the safer the treasury. Second, a balance of power is essential. The captain quartermaster system was a check against dictatorship, the same principle behind a board of directors overseeing a CEO. And third, and most importantly, informal rules are always stronger than written laws. The culture of terror Blackbeard created worked more effectively than any code. What we call corporate culture today was for them a matter of survival. It turns out these cutthroats intuitively discovered the fundamentals of modern management 300 years ago. The Pirate Code is not a story about noble robbers. It's the Articles of Incorporation for Jolly Roger, LLC, a business plan where the sole objective was maximum profit, and the only liability to be minimized was the crew killing each other. Justice wasn't the goal. It was a tool. And so, they leave us with one central question. What truly made this machine work? What held them together? The democratic principles enshrined in their code, or a primal fear of unimaginable punishment? Was it the aspiration for a just social contract, the very ideas that would later form the basis of constitutions, or the animalistic terror of a keel tearing flesh from bone? Their ship was the perfect laboratory to find the answer. Write just one word in the comments, principles or fear. Let's see which one wins.